All right, we're going to talk about the semantic elements for organizing a page. So what are semantic elements? Semantic elements are elements that clearly describe their meaning to the browser and the developer. The word semantic means the word tells you what it is. So we're going to see also some non-semantic elements in a little bit. We're going to talk about div and span. And they're non-semantic, and we're going to see why they're not as nice as semantic, but we still need them. So examples of semantic elements might be forms. If we see a section outlined with a form tag, we know what it is. We know it's a form. The same thing with a table tag or an article tag. We know an article holds an article, a table holds a table, and a form holds a form. So here is a list on the World Wide Web Consortium school site about the semantic elements that we can use to define different parts of a web page. Now, I want you to notice the diagram here. They're using a 2-column layout. We're not there yet, but this is part of the process of getting there. This is why the semantic elements are important. So some of the semantic elements you can use are articles. Asides. A side is usually a sidebar, something that appears off to the side of some content. Details. Fig captions and figures, we'll talk about those in a minute. A footer usually comes at the bottom of the page. Okay. You can have a main section. If I didn't have a section, an article, and an aside here, I might have a main in there taking their spot. Okay. So all of these are containers. They don't really do anything, but they mark sections of our page, and we can use them later to format our page. So it's important to lay out our content into these areas so that we can access them and change the format of our page. Later on, we'll get this to a 2-column website. But we can't do that if we don't have some kind of containers around these things so that we can move parts of our page around. So there's also nav section. A lot of times you have a nav bar. It could be at the top here. It could be a vertical nav bar at the side. But it's where the buttons are that get you around the website. A section tag, if we need to divide something up into smaller sections, we can use that. There's summary and times. I don't see those used very often, but they're there. So there's a lot of options. And our book doesn't talk about all the options. So over here, they're showing us an HTML page with a structural element, or with structural elements. And they're using the header for San Joaquin Valley Town Hall. And inside that, they have the H1 at the top of the page. So the H1 is contained within the header. Let me go over here. This is the page. Now, this header surrounds that H1, which is the very top of the page. It is the header of the page. The header doesn't actually do anything with our code yet. It's just a way to organize the page. But it's going to be very important when we start getting to the CSS that we'll use to format it. You've already used some CSS. We'll be able to format the whole header section with some CSS. And then the main part of the page, in this case, is just the paragraph. So this is the main section of the page. They've taken that paragraph and surrounded it with a semantic tag that says, hey, this is the main section. And in this three-line web page, we have a footer, and at the bottom we have a small paragraph. It's using a symbol for the copyright symbol, copyright 2022, the San Joaquin Valley Town Hall. But that's contained in the footer tag, and those are all within the body. So the semantic tags don't add anything right now other than structure. And once we have the structure, we'll be able to use it to style our page better. So I want to point out that before we had semantic tags, we used something called a div, or division tag. So we could have containers made up. Here's a div, opening div, and a closing div. Here's another div and a closing div. We would have those all over our page to divide our page up into its sections. And it worked very well, but I can't see the structure as well as I can with words like header, main. So what we used to do, or what everybody used to do, is something like this. So we'd have an ID, a div, and we'd give it an ID of header to mark this as the div that's controlling our header. We'd have a div with an ID of main to say this is the main section of our page. And we'd have this div with an ID of footer to say this is the footer of our page. Great, but all these divs get confusing and it's a lot of extra typing. So HTML5 added these semantic elements so that we could replace these div containers, which are block elements, meaning block elements. We just talked about them a couple videos ago. They have a space above and below. They take up as much room as they're allowed to the left and right. We replaced these generic divs as often as we could when it's a common thing. Rather than say div ID equals header, we just say header. So that's where these semantic elements came from. We kept doing the same divs over and over and over. So hey, let's actually give these things a container that means something. So the divs with IDs were replaced by the semantic tags. Now that doesn't mean we don't still use divs. We use them all the time. So to use any of these tags, you take the content that you want to put in the container and you just surround it with a starting and ending tag. Same thing with a div. Whatever I want to put into some kind of container, I can put a starting and ending tag. In these cases, they're using an ID of main, so they can apply CSS to something with an ID of main. In the semantic version, we just apply our CSS to the main tag. So I kind of showed you two things at once there. This is the old way. This is the new way. Use the semantic tags wherever you can to organize your page. And before I move on, I will show you the two versions of this. Here's San Joaquin Valley Town Hall. And this is the code for that. Make it a little bit bigger. We have headers with H1s in between, a section with a paragraph, and a footer with another paragraph inside of it. Here's the exact same page. It looks exactly the same, except in this one, the code is using divs to divide the page up into its areas. All right, so always use the semantic tags when you can.